Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the F1 Word podcast, episode 1. Not a very original name, but I will work on it, I promise. Hello to everyone on YouTube, as always. But if you are listening on Spotify or SoundCloud for the first time, welcome as well. Great to have you with us. Got some interesting topics to go over today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Pierre Gasly's penalty from Baku, that one he got from starting or having to start from the pit lane after his weighbridge infringement. We're also going to be talking about the confirmed, not confirmed, possibly confirmed circuits for 2020, including Silverstone, Zandvoort and Monza. And we'll also take some of your questions from over on Twitter as well. But as always, with the streams and podcasts and whatnot, I am not alone. It wouldn't be a podcast if I was. I'm going to start by saying a very good afternoon to Stuart. Hello, Stuart. Good to have you with us again.
Hello, Sean. How's it going? This is all very exciting.
It is, isn't it? And I should actually say we're pre-recording this, so this is a bit weird for us. We're so used to doing this live, but it's going to be a nice change of pace.
Yeah, I think I'm very excited to see what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, I've got some juicy topics as always. And also, he usually comes along for live streams over on the YouTube channel, but hello and welcome back, Dan. It's been a while, mate.
Yeah, it's been some time, but it's good to be back, and I'm looking forward to talking about some F1.
Probably a good idea on an F1 Word channel.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Probably a good step in the right direction, definitely. And we're going to start with Pierre Gasly today. Now, I know we're looking back to Baku. When this goes up, it's going to be going up on Sunday, and we're recording this on Friday, so we're a little bit late to the party. But Pierre Gasly's penalty in FP2 caused a little bit of controversy over on social media, Stuart, didn't he? He got, obviously, the pit lane start for his weighbridge infringement, but there was some confusion around it because actually he got the penalty more because the team worked on the car rather than because he missed the weighbridge.
Yeah, and I like how you had to clarify exactly which session he got his pit lane penalty in, because he did get 3 overall. Yeah, it was a bit unfortunate that whatever systems they had in place, no one from Pierre Gasly to his team had paid attention to the fact that he was being called into the weighbridge. And so this falls under the sporting regulation 29.1. Everyone loves a nice sporting regulation. But the significant point is that the car was not in the same state as it was when it was called in. And once it reaches that point, they'll be required to start from the pit lane. So seeing as that's written in black and white, there was nothing really they could do from that point on. And the only point of contention came whether we need to change the letter of the law to make that less of a harsh punishment, if you thought it was a harsh punishment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read the thing from the stewards. They said the stewards reviewed video evidence and heard from the driver of car 10, Pierre Gasly, obviously, and the team representative, and determined that the driver failed to stop for weighing when required to do so. Instead, he drove on and proceeded to do a pit stop where the car was worked on by lifting the car, and all 4 wheels were changed in breach of Article 29.1a. I do love how specific they are with lifting the car and changing all 4 wheels, but that's what he's got the penalty for. Pit lane start, though, Dan, that does seem... I mean, it's fair based on how the law is written, but it does seem really harsh when you consider things like pit lane speeding as a reprimand and a fine.
Yeah, and when you think about what happened with Sebastian Vettel in Brazil last year, he got away very lightly. So it's a new one for Formula One. I'm struggling to think of something where the exact same situation happened. I don't know if you two can remember anything of late. I can't. Anyway, I might be being a wally. I'm sure someone will correct me. But I think what I want to see from this is that it's a precedent set now. Because Formula One over the last couple of years, we see incidents happen, and then the next race, the precedent that was set just completely goes out the window. So if this happens again over the rest of the season, I want to see that consistency, because I think Formula One needs that at the moment. But yeah, it's a little harsh, but I do agree with you. I think this punishment fits the crime.
I think what normally we tend to see happen if a driver misses the weighbridge is, you see their pit crew hurriedly pushing them back down the pit lane to get them back onto the weighbridge, and they lose a bit of time. And actually the rules, I can read you the rules now, the rules state a reprimand will be imposed on any driver who fails to stop when signalled to, provided the car is then brought back to the garage without delay and the technical delegate is satisfied the car has been brought back in exactly the same condition as it was when it was driven into the pits. So yeah, their big mistake was changing the tyres and sending it out again, at which point the FIA couldn't be certain that the car was legal when it was out on track.
So they could have wheeled it back after all of that if they'd realised he'd missed the weighbridge then.
Yeah, if they got it back before they started doing anything to it, then they would have just got that reprimand, which I think everyone would have been fine with.
We're all kind of in agreement that the penalty is completely correct and fair based on the letter of the law. I know that there's some on social media that think that the penalties can be changed and the rules can be changed between sessions. They can't. So based on, and in fact, to be fair, Christian Horner said that, didn't he? He said that the law says this, so we have been rightly punished, but it needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I would, the point of, is this a ridiculously over the top penalty for the crime, then I'd say, yeah, it probably is. And it's definitely at least worth investigating, what other punishments could fit, whether it would be like a few grid places or a fine or whatever, depending on, I think grid places seems like the more legitimate kind of thing. So you still get an on-track punishment, but not so much that you start behind everyone else.
Yeah, I think as well, it's, in my eyes, a little bit of a similar incident to Kubica's sort of pit lane start, and they took him out too early. It's a silly mistake, and one you just don't expect teams to make. But the punishment that they can't really go changing punishments just out of thin air. So it's a pain, and on the surface, perhaps it looks a little bit over the top, but rules are there for a reason. So yeah, it's harsh, but I do agree with the penalty.
There was some talk as well. People want. I think it should be a fine and a reprimand. So if pit lane speeding is a fine and a reprimand in practice, I assume in qualifying as well. I know it's not in the race. You get an actual time penalty or a drive-through penalty. But if it's a reprimand and fine for that, then it should be a reprimand and fine for that kind of infringement in practice. The problem is there needs to be some sort of penalty for that, because as ridiculous as it may sound to any newcomers to Formula One, FP2 could dictate the grid. If we get heavy rain at some point that writes off FP3 in qualifying, the result then gets taken from FP2. So if a driver like Gasly in this instance goes out severely underweight and then sets the fastest time by a mile and then deliberately misses the weighbridge knowing that he's only going to get a fine, that could be pole for Sunday. And I know that sounds mad and really far-fetched scenarios in many respects, but it could happen, and that's kind of the thing with Formula One, Stuart. That kind of thing does crop up from time to time.
Yeah. And like you say, kind of far-fetched, but we have occasionally had Saturdays that have been a complete washout due to inclement weather. And, there have been times when the track has been unfit to race and they've had to hurriedly get it back in order. In fact, if free practice one, for example, if that had happened on Saturday and it had been much worse, if there had been problems around the track that meant the cars couldn't run on Saturday, then either they'd have to squeeze some kind of qualifying into Sunday or just go with FP2. So there is a chance that FP2 weighs in on things. And, once we're in official sessions, the cars do have to run to the legal spec, and that needs to be enforced. And the stewards kind of have to act blindly to that, even if the letter of the law looks a bit over the top. It is interesting that speeding in the pit lane is only a fine and a reprimand, considering the sort of safety aspects there, but the fine is actually quite high. So whereas running what's technically maybe an illegal car during an official session may have implications for, positioning and standings in any sessions that bring you points or positions. So
yeah, there just needs to be something there. But I suppose that the question now then, Dan, is what needs to be there? What kind of penalty can they put in? Because I think a pit lane start to completely mess up a driver's entire weekend because of an infringement in practice seems a little bit, it's incredibly harsh. I mean, people would argue and may well argue in the comment section to this over on YouTube and whatnot that actually he made the mistake, so it's tough. He knows what the rule is and that's that. But what kind of penalty? Just deleting time, suspended from that session?
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think I was a bit shocked when I first heard the penalty. I thought, oh, that is a bit severe. I think if it was a 5-place or a 10-place grid penalty, I would have been more comfortable with it. I think that would have gave us a little bit more action in qualifying. I know that's not what the stewards are there for, to spice up the show. They're there to enforce the regulations. But starting from the pit lane, it ruins his entire weekend almost. Into the first lap, he's already comfortably behind. There's a bit of strategy differential, I suppose, but it just seems a big, I suppose, consequence for Gasly, considering he just missed the weigh-in bridge.
I think what would be good, and I can't imagine the FIA doing this, but because a lot of the rules and regulations and the penalties that go with them are sort of have built up over like 60 years and are sort of a little bit of a muddle of old and new. It would be nice to have them lay out a sort of a pattern or some kind of algorithm for how penalties match up to infringements. So you'll have different kinds of ways you can break the regulation. The kind of using too many parts, you've gone through your engines, that's one thing, or you've broken the sporting regulations by running a car underweight or using too much fuel or whatever, or there's things like cheating on track, like running someone wide. And then there's different kinds of penalties, like driving through the pit lane, a grid lane penalty starting from the pit lane, and so on. And I have no sense of, or like a fine or a reprimand, and I have no sense of how these different things match up. Like, I feel like a safety infringement should maybe match to a grid lane penalty. Also, there just seems to be a sort of random matching up of penalties to infringements, and I'd like to see some kind of consistency for how they decide which punishment fits the crime.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like they could do with a shake-up, because I think Christian Horner described this one as a hangover from when we used to have qualifying across Friday and Saturday. So it does feel like there needs to be a shake-up somewhere, or just a tidy up. Just tie off the loose ends, just tidy it up quite nicely. But I go back to what you said earlier, Stuart, and kind of what you were saying there. You get a fine and a reprimand for pit lane speeding. That's far more dangerous than missing the weighbridge. I know from a sporting point of view, running an illegal car would be disastrous, but also, without being too over the top, hitting a mechanic at speed is going to be incredibly disastrous as well. So if it's a pit lane start for that infringement, then it's surely got to be at least a pit lane start for speeding in the pit lane. I completely agree with what you're saying. It's madness, really. But what would you have done then, Stuart, if you were writing that rule, if you were changing the rule for Fridays? What would be the penalty you'd put on a Gasly situation?
Well, I've been racking my brain about this, because I think Christian Horner sort of has zeroed in on the main problem in it being a hangover, because while you should be running a legal car for most of the time during all of the sessions, Friday, even though, as you say, FP2, FP1 could sort of lead on to qualifying position under exceptional circumstances, you're not going to gain much advantage through free practice, especially on a Friday. So I'm wondering if they need to particularly relax rules around Friday practice with regards to sort of how you run the cars technically. And again, I probably wouldn't give it any more than a grid penalty, maybe 5 places, same as a gearbox, if I was starting from scratch. And that's the kind of thing that you can add to as well. So if he does something like that again, you can add another 5 places or so on. And similarly, probably to pit lane speeding, I think that would stop people speeding in the pit lane if you said you get a few places dropped down the grid every time you speed.
Yeah, you thought grid drop as well, didn't you, Dan? You thought that would be a good way to go.
Yeah, I just think that's a little bit like you've both said there. It just all seems so messy, the penalty system at the moment. So a grid drop just seems pretty straightforward to me. And as well, I look at Kimi Räikkönen, who did have an illegal car in qualifying, and he got the same punishment as Gasly. So I don't even know if that's particularly fair, considering one was in qualifying, one was in practice. But yeah, for me, yeah, just a grid drop I think would have been a little bit easier, especially for new viewers.
Yeah, a few people suggested, and I thought about it as well, is deleting times from the session. The problem is, which times do you delete? Do you delete all of his times from FP2? Do you throw him out of the session altogether? Do you delete the times that were just prior to him coming to the weighbridge, or everything before that? I think that would just cause a lot of confusion. So I think grid drop would be a really decent solution. But I'm pretty sure we're all going to agree on this one as well. One thing we can say about Gasly on Sunday is, reliability problem aside, he absolutely nailed it. He was back through the field and drove brilliantly. What he did on those medium tyres, at least a week he'd been driving on them, or it felt like it, 39 laps or something like that.
Yeah, he really made them work for him, and it's a real shame he couldn't finish the race he started. I would have been really interested to see what he would have done. He definitely seemed to be managing them better than Leclerc did through the race. But I think we're beginning to see a decent side of Gasly. I think mechanical issues aside, again, you have to wonder what his team are up to this week with those 3 separate pit lane start penalties that were completely out of his control and all down to whatever the heck his pit crew are up to.
Yeah, what did you make of the weekend? I haven't had a chance to talk to you, Dan, actually, about Baku at all. What did you make of that weekend? I know some people saying it's a bit boring, but I thought it was all right, wasn't it? It wasn't the best, but it's okay.
Yeah, that is pretty much how I would describe it. It was all right. It was better than China. I mean, it's not hard to be better than China, but it was better than China. Especially early on in the weekend, there were some bizarre moments, which is what Formula One's all about. And it wasn't the best race of all time, but I think there was a bit of tension there. And seeing guys, I mean, when Gasly did pullover. And he was, like we said, the Red Bulls in particular, they had really good long run pace. But even when Gasly late on caused that virtual safety car, part of me was thinking, oh, just throw out a full safety car, please, just to spice it up a little bit. But no, it was fine. But I think there were more stories coming out of the race than I think people were alluding to.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I won't ask you, Stuart. We did a full hour and 20 minutes on Sunday and race reaction on it, so it can't have been that bad, can it, if we were talking for that long? But I will throw one question both at you very quickly, and I'll give my view very quickly as well on it before we move on to circuits. Starting with you, Dan, do you think Gasly's going to bounce back and get it right this season, or do you think he's under too much pressure and struggling to get going? I mean, he's definitely struggling to get going, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't think he'll get to the pace of Max. I think Max is another calibre of driver, if I'm being fully honest. And I think the team a little bit regret not taking on Sainz. But I think come the end of the season, he'll be comfortably 6th place, potentially 5th, mixing it up if he can get ahead of a Ferrari potentially. So, yeah, I think he'll recover.
I'm glad we're seeing a sort of the beginnings of what looks like him sort of getting on top of this car. Clearly, he was struggling with it early on in the season. He's a good driver. We've seen him last year and in previous categories, just how good he is. And I think if Red Bull provide him with the support network that allow him to grow and become comfortable with the car and get his confidence with it, then yeah, I think very much like Dan, I think we'll see him a strong second driver for Red Bull by the end of the year. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think he's had his problems, but for me at least, he's demonstrated that he's got the speed. He's shown he can race in Baku. We saw it as well. He did well in China, so I think he'll bounce back. I don't think there's a lot of pressure on him, and obviously I think the reason there are so many question marks around him is because of Red Bull's previous with Daniel Kvyat. I think if that hadn't have happened, people would be like, I'll give him time. It's only been 4 races, but he'll be fine. I think he'll be fine. Worst case scenario is he just takes a year to get going and continues to back up and add points to what Max does, because with all due respect to Pierre, that's what he's there for. He's not there to challenge Max, is he? It's very much until he moves on his team. So Gasly is there to do a job, and I think he's doing all right, quite frankly. But yes, we will move on to tracks, circuits, and all of that. There's been some developments, but not really developments this last couple of days, or it'll be a good few days by the time this goes out. The first one, the first part of the announcement, if you like, didn't surprise me, and that is that a contract has been agreed between the F1 and the Zandvoort promoter, but has yet to be signed. That has come from a motorsport.com source, a senior motorsport.com source. I'd like to think they have a rough idea what they're talking about there, and they've got some people in the right places. But what surprised me on this, Dan, was that it's in for Spain next year, apparently, and we're going to lose, not that we're going to lose the Spanish Grand Prix. That's not so much of a surprise because there's been some question marks for a while, but I was surprised it'd be that early in the season with the work that still needs to be done at that circuit. So Zandvoort in for Spain. Discuss, Dan.
Yeah, I was pretty shocked. Obviously, there's been murmurings and rumours for a little while now that Zandvoort's going to come on the calendar. First of all, I didn't expect it to be... I mean, again, this is not confirmed, so a little bit of speculation, but I didn't expect it to be as early as next season. That's bizarre that we could potentially see... I know it's not a new circuit, but 2, I suppose, new circuits to some, coming on the calendar next season with Vietnam coming in. But like you say, it just seems, considering the amount of work that needs to be done to get that circuit up to scratch, that doesn't seem a very long window. And also Spain, that is early on in the season. So it has baffled me a little bit. And I will say, I quite like the Spanish Grand Prix. So that's made me a tad upset. And looking at the Zandvoort track, if I'm fully honest, I've never seen a race at that circuit, so I can't be, fully knowledgeable about it, but I've seen bits and bobs. Doesn't seem the best track for overtaking, which is what people complain about with Spain. So on a racing side of things, I'm a little bit hesitant, but yeah, this did seem to come out of nowhere, and I am a little bit baffled.
Yeah, and on that last point, I think Max Verstappen, despite being a Dutch native, agrees with you. He has said he does like the circuit very much, but he has said that he would recommend that changes were made to some of the corners because it's already quite difficult and notorious for not being able to follow one another before you even bring F1 cars, which are also notorious for not being able to follow one another. So yeah, while he sings the praise of the circuit, he says, "Oh, it's a little, it's going to be really hard to get racy and overtake on." And again, yeah, 1 year we hardly ever again, it's not really an announcement because nothing's confirmed yet. We hardly ever get circuit announcements 1 year away from the race going live, despite the circuit, already being built. They've only got one permanent grandstand. 3 of the corners need to have their runoffs extended. But in terms of it replacing Barcelona, unlike Dan, I don't think I'd miss Barcelona that much. It's not often provided too many exciting races, and I think that comes partly with it being the winter testing circuit. So, everybody knows it inside out because they've already done 2 solid weeks of racing there earlier in the year. And I think, as a general rule, I think we should move away from having racing circuits being testing circuits. I think they should at least come fresh every year to a race. I like to be somewhat optimistic about this circuit. At least it's nice to at least go somewhere new, and if they can make the changes, then I'll definitely look forward to it. Clearly, they're thinking about the wave of popularity moving from the Alonso crowd to the Verstappen crowd, because we know those Dutch fans turn out to every single race in Europe.
Yeah, I've always said that they'd be mad not to tap into that Orange Army market. I've always felt like they'd be crazy not to do that at Liberty, but I'm not sold on Zandvoort. I'm like Dan. I've not really seen much, if any, racing around there really, but it does look very narrow and doesn't look like a very up to F1 spec track. So if, as is reported, it will replace Spain next year, they've got 12 months to get that into shape. And I'm going to read a quote from his bloggy article thing. Everyone's favourite 21st century journalist Joe said, Dutch Grand Prix will be confirmed on May 14th and will place Zandvoort on May 12th, 2020, so long as there is some work done to upgrade the paddock area. So it's not just circuit that people are asking them to look at. It looks as though the biggest issue is going to be the paddock area, Stuart, which, I mean, it's an important part of a race weekend, but surely on top of that, they need to look at the circuit.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is that they have actually recently upgraded the paddock area. They did some work on the pit lane and the media centre, but they do admit they do have to take it another step further if they're going to go for F1. But they are, what they're basically saying is, if we spend the money, then it could be sorted for the next 20 years. That's the process of investment and stuff. But absolutely, it's not ready yet. And I wonder if F1 would be happy enough to take the hit at a bit of a shabby first weekend if from 2021 onwards it's sort of up to like full spec. I know like it has to be like FIA grade 1 standard in order to safely race there, but otherwise, we've been to tracks like Canada and Brazil like a few years ago before they had their upgrades where things are shabby around the edges, to say the least. So it's not like we can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie used to always criticise Brazil, didn't he, for their infrastructure at Interlagos. And actually, by the way, the Brazilian Grand Prix is another one under the threat. They're talking about a street circuit, I think, in Rio rather than Interlagos, which I think would be... I do not think fans would be happy, is what I'm going to say, because that is one of the tracks we all look forward to, because 9 times out of 10, knocking on wood for the rest of this season, that is the race that gives us utter chaos and brilliant racing and gives overtaking as well. So I think there'll be a lot of frustration if that goes. But yeah, I'll be honest, from a racing point of view, I won't be sad to see Barcelona drop. From a historical point of view, I will be, because it's always been pretty much always been in Formula 1 as long as I've been watching. So it's one of those that would be sad to see leave in that respect, if that makes sense. But then I suppose you could argue that about any track. Are we too sentimental, Dan, with these circuits and things like that? Do we need to just stop it as Formula 1 fans, or is it the history's a big part of the sport though, isn't it? So
it is. And I think as well, because there's so much dark clouds over so many historic circuits. Look at Silverstone out of contract, Monza, that's looking uncertain. So I think it's a bit of a sketchy time. And I will just say, as a Grosjean fan, turn 3 is very difficult in Spain. So I don't mind that one going off the calendar whatsoever. But what I just wanted to quickly add as well is that I hope, and this is something Formula 1 fans sometimes aren't the best at, is if we do go to Zandvoort, I hope they give it at least 2 chances of a race. Because I remember 2016, Baku, everyone instantly saying how awful it was and we need to leave Baku. And then the next 2 years we had utter chaotic races that were fantastic. This year wasn't so great, but still, I think if it does come on the circuit, first year might not be so great, but I just hope people give it a chance.
Absolutely, Dan. Give it a chance, because you never know. I like that. But it's interesting you bring up Monza. ACI and Formula One have reached a general agreement regarding the economic aspects of the collaboration contract for the Italian Grand Prix at Monza for the next 5-year period 2020 to 2024. To translate that, it's basically we've agreed financial terms, now we just need to get it signed off, basically. Fantastic news. Going back to that sentimental thing, Stuart, Monza, I think there are a few tracks on the calendar, Monza, Spa, Silverstone. It'd be a travesty to lose them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it was looking, even at the beginning of the week, it was looking very ropey. There were lots of pessimistic, not press releases, but the very sort of the word on the ground was that Monza was about to disappear. So I'm very glad to see they've signed this off, especially as, well, I'd be interested to know your thoughts about this, because I'm quite excited, but I think some purists might not be, that Monza's sort of aiming to have quite significant upgrades in the next 5 years, including widening the whole track, getting rid of one of the chicanes, the second chicane, which I think is the weirdest one to get rid of, and opening up the Lesmo in order to make it even faster, which I think, I mean, particularly around widening the tracks, is a narrow track. I think that could be quite exciting, but they were waiting for that deal to come through. And of all the historic tracks, Monza, I think, is right up there with the one you need to save. Monza, Silverstone, those are great tracks. Things like Barcelona, not so much. Hungary, not so much. But I think you definitely need to keep Monza in it. You definitely need to have a race on the track, on the calendar that's one of those ridiculous high-speed circuits. I was quite sad when they chopped down the Hockenheim ring.
Yeah.
Because that was quite similar to Monza. It had lots and lots of long straights and lots of chicanes, and it was outrageous and different from all the other tracks. And now Monza's the only one of those left, and I'm glad we're basically 1 inch away from keeping that on the calendar. It would be bizarre if we didn't.
Well, imagine from a financial point of view the hit that Liberty would take if we didn't have an Italian Grand Prix on, because those grandstands are packed every single year for the whole weekend. And I think that'd be mad to lose. But I had no idea about those upgrades, and I'm gonna have to be all old man yells at cloud about this. No, certainly not the second chicane. I love that chicane because we see all weekend drivers can't get it right. In fact, I say put the gravel trap back. I'm going to go proper old school on it. And the Lesmos, do they need to be made quicker? I mean, they're quite quick corners anyway, and they're quite a spectacle. I don't know if they need changing. They give you a good run as well up to the Ascari chicane, and then, I mean, if they touch the Parabolica any more than they already have, then wow, I'm not going to be happy, Dan. I will kick off.
I'm a bit in the middle. That's me not wanting to appease to either of you two. I quite like the idea of quickening up or speeding up the Lesmos. I think that could be quite fun because on that straight up to Ascari, we don't usually see many overtakes. I suppose we might see a little change this year, but in the past couple of years, that's not been a prime overtaking spot, quite like the main home straight is. So that potentially could intrigue me a little bit, but apart from that, maybe just widening the circuit overall, like you said, Stuart, could be fun. But I don't really have any issues with Monza. I thought last year's race was perfect. That was a beautiful race. So if we can get that every year, I'm more than happy.
They were also, they didn't necessarily say as in to bring it into the actual Formula One race, but they were also talking about renovating the banking and bringing that back into operation so they could use that and bring back the 10-kilometer track. But I think they were just talking sort of in general, not necessarily for Formula One, because I think that might be a little bit too much.
Oh, I don't know. if they could incorporate that a little bit like they did with Indy, when we raced at Indy, that would be quite cool. It would just add a bit more to the spectacle, but it'd be a bit gimmicky, wouldn't it, for Formula One? It's not. No, I kind of agree with widening it. Certainly at certain parts, that run down to the second chicane is quite narrow. We saw in F2 a couple of years ago a bit of chaos down there with the track being so narrow. We know that drivers like to run others off. I know that if you widen the track, the drivers will just push them out even further. It's not going to make a difference there. I just hope they don't go removing grass and gravel from everywhere, because that kind of, I like, I'm going off topic, I know, but I love that if a driver makes a mistake and runs wide, they're on the grass, they're in the gravel, they've made a mistake, that's cost them. This whole runoff thing is just, we're going to look like IndyCar in COTA. That turn 19, was it? That turn 19 fun. But yeah, I'm glad that Monza is looking like it's going to stick around. Also looking like it is, but isn't going to stick around, is Silverstone. Fingers crossed this gets sorted. There is some bias there because it's my local, if you like, because it's the one I can get to every year. It was broken by everyone's favourite 21st century journalist, Joe. But also Mark Hughes over on Twitter, who said that it was all done and dusted and they got a contract, I believe, to 2022 was what was reported. I didn't check that before I went and did this. I probably should have done. But then Silverstone came out and said, unfortunately, there is unsubstantiated news regarding the agreement of a new deal for the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. At this time, we can confirm that we have not agreed a contract. However, talks are still progressing. It feels to me, Stuart, a little bit like it's sort of almost like Monza. It's sort of there, and they just need to cross the T's and dot the I's, but also like they're hanging on to announce it at the British Grand Prix weekend.
Yeah, that could be it, couldn't it? I'm feeling more positive about Silverstone than I have for a long time. I was I was much more towards believing that it would disappear, at least for a few years, and they wouldn't get this all sorted out, because there's always been the issue of money around Silverstone, even though it is, again, my home track. But it is a very good track, and despite being a classic track, they've worked year on year to keep it one of the best flight circuits on the calendar. It's not one of the sort of multi-billion pound like mega inside a hotel with palm trees Tilke circuits, but it's it's a top grade international circuit, and it's worked really well, and it's produced good races, and the crowds come. So I'm glad we're edging towards what looks like could be a deal. They definitely were in a position previously where they were just hemorrhaging so much money that they just couldn't hang on to it, no matter how much they loved it. So yeah, I'm definitely feeling more optimistic than I have been.
Palm trees in Northamptonshire. That'd be an achievement, definitely. But yeah, are you glad to hear that Silverstone, it's at least looking more positive, Dan? The noises have changed a little bit now.
Yeah, I was in full agreement with what Stuart was just saying. I was 100% thinking that we were going to skip a season. I was thinking, yeah, it'll probably go for 2020 and then make a triumphant return in 2021. But it's nice that there is some positivity going around, because it was looking so bleak for so long. And yes, like you two have just said it, I am biased as well because it is my home race as well. But it is a historic circuit, and even though it's my home race, I would love to see Silverstone on the circuit on the calendar, as much as I would love to see Spa or Monza. There's just some tracks which have to be on the calendar. So it's good news, and there's no complaints from me.
Yep, I should also say, actually, before Stuart says what he wants to, none of this is confirmed, by the way. We don't this. But in fact, by the time this podcast goes out, which could be quite awkward, it could all turn out on Saturday. They've all been dropped. But yeah, go on, Stuart. Sorry, interrupting you there.
I was just going to say, obviously, we have no idea, what goes on behind closed doors and what the negotiations are like. But, externally, the public facing the way it looks, Liberty seem to have more positivity about deals. They seem more like they want to make deals rather than what Bernie Ecclestone used to do, which is just sort of be like, it's my way or the highway, and just sort of be really cynical to the press and seem really rigid, and like he didn't really care about saving any particular race. It was just he would play hardball in the press to get the most amount of money he possibly could, which, he admitted later that was because he worked for an investment bank company who actually owned Formula One. His job was just to make deals, and his entire focus was on getting the most money as possible, not really caring about the racing. Whereas Liberty, I know they're doing some weird maneuvers, like trying to get more cities to do street circuits and stuff, which I'm a bit about, but they do seem to be more about, let's go racing, let's go classic tracks, let's go street circuits, let's go everything, let's try and make a deal done. I think they're more positive about trying to reach agreements with circuits where Formula One is popular.
I can imagine that those at Silverstone are being quite stubborn, though. I mean, they are British.
Oh, yeah.
We are quite a stubborn group, aren't we? But I can imagine they're sort of giving it the whole, hang on, we're quite historic here. If you were going to give the likes of Miami free entry, then why don't we get free entry? But what I find fascinating is last year we had all this driver silly season. It looks like we've got circuit silly season this year. I'm quite happy for that. It gives us something to talk about. Obviously, question marks as well still over Mexico. That doesn't look all that positive. And like I said earlier, Brazil possibly replaced by a race in Rio. Would you be angry to see Interlagos go, Dan? I'd be livid.
Yeah, and just to move it as well. If Brazil went off the calendar completely, I'd be frustrated. But I think, okay, that they might not have had the funds. That makes sense. But to move it, No. I don't want that. I don't want that. Even if we have another circuit like Baku, which is always giving us crazy drama, no. What makes Interlagos great is that it's a completely different circuit to the rest of the calendar. It's a little bit Mickey Mousey in the second sector, but sometimes it's Glock moment. I mean, that is pure racing. You can't get rid of that. You can't get rid of that just to move it to in the city centre, because I think that's something that. Sorry, I'm going to say it. Electric Formula racing. Sometimes, sorry, but no, but that's what it does wrong. Is that it's all circuits you can't overtake with, and I hope Formula One doesn't go to 50% street circuits, 50% actual circuits, because that's not what Formula One's about. So I think you can guess. I want them to stay at Interlagos.
Some passion there, wasn't there, Stuart? He meant every word of that.
I absolutely agree with you. I'm still barely over the fact that they got rid of Interlagos from the season finale, which is where it belongs, because it has the ingredients to provide exciting races quite reliably. It's funny. I think it's partly the weather, partly the fact that it's on a big slope. But it's such a simple circuit. Like it's got like 6 corners, maybe a bit more than 6, but it's barely, there's barely anything to it, and yet it always tends to pull something out of the bag, and the fans are amazing. I'm sure if we went to Rio, we'd have a good atmosphere and stuff, but you just can't take away from Interlagos. And like Dan said, I don't think Formula One belongs on the streets. In the same way that I don't think Formula One belongs on oval tracks. Like, it might be nice to have 1 or 2, but at its heart, it's a big circuit sport.
Yeah, I agree. I hope they keep Brazil. And I kind of hope they keep Mexico as well. We tend to get good racing there. But we're going to move on from circuits, and we're going to take some questions from over on Twitter. We got some good ones. We're going to have a look at a couple that maybe might take a bit of a longer answer. Then we'll do some quick fire ones as well. So thanks to everybody for popping your questions in over there. You can follow over on Twitter at F1Word. First one comes from Orange B King. He's been around on this channel probably longer than I have. Says, now we have Mercedes domination and all the big historic teams in the sport have had a period of domination. Which team on the current grid do you think could have a dominant period in the future that hasn't had it before? I thought that was quite a juicy question. That was quite good. And I bet you two are nervous now, so who I'm going to come to first. I'll go alphabetically because, he brought Formula E and Grosjean into it. Dan, what do you reckon?
That's mean. So one of the current teams, did you say?
Yes, that hasn't had a period of domination before.
Blimey, I'd love to say Haas. I would love to say that. I think the most realistic one potentially could be Renault. 2005 and 6, you're not counting that, are you?
No.
Just to make sure. Okay, good. Yeah, I'd say Renault, because I think they're the most likely of all the midfield teams, if you want to call them that, to potentially make a step forward in the next few years. Yeah, I'm going to say Renault. It's not a very good answer, but that's what you're getting. Sorry.
Yeah, I had a feeling you might go with Renault. I'm not counting Renault. They had a good era of domination with engines, but not as a team, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, you can have Renault.
When I was thinking about this, I sort of ended up sidling towards Renault as well, even though they're looking a bit crumbly at their end. And the reason is due to the sort of current period we're in, where we've kind of got a few B teams that are sort of teams that have like partnerships or rely a bit on some of the top teams. And if you had someone like, if I was thinking about Haas and I was thinking about Alfa Romeo, and then I was like, well, will Ferrari let them? Would they, they might have a good season the way that Toro Rosso had a good season and beat Red Bull one year in 2008, but
it won't happen again.
But would the senior team let them have a period of domination? I don't think so. So a kind of, unless Haas switch to a different model of going racing, it'd be tricky for them to sort of have this period of domination, because I think Ferrari would change the terms of their relationship and they'd have to start going their own way, which may destabilize them. Renault are in a good position. Racing Point run very lean, so unless they have a ramp up and manage to get loads and loads of funding together in order to put a Mercedes style operation together, I don't see them having a dominant period, even if they manage to win a title at some point. And I mean, McLaren have already had domination before, but I think Renault will get to a title before they will at the moment.
Wow, predictions. I think Renault are the obvious answer, aren't they? But I'm going to throw a wild card in. You kind of almost dismissed them a little bit there, Stuart. But Racing Point, are a different animal to what they were under Force India, because they've actually got some money behind them now. And Lawrence Stroll actually sounds quite... He's in it for the long haul, not just because his son's still young, but he's in it for the long haul, and he's sort of talking about expanding the factory and their facilities, and he wants to get to the front end of the grid over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So I think with that ambition there is and the money behind them now, there is the possibility, but it goes back to what you were saying, Stuart. Are Mercedes going to allow a customer team to batter them? They're not. They're absolutely not. So I think Renault are the obvious answer, but I'm going to throw Racing Point in there as well. I think they're a good shout. We have got a second question, though, that I'm going to pop straight up from WM Ryan. He's a patron as well, so thank you very much for your continued support. Massively appreciated. Says, which driver and which team have most impressed you or exceeded your expectations this year? Conversely, which driver and team have been your biggest disappointments? I'll kick this one off if that's okay. Genuinely, not just because he's here, one of my biggest disappointments is Grosjean, because he finished last year so strongly, and I thought he would come into this year with everything that went wrong at the start of last year, show us he still got it, and he hasn't. So he's got to be one of the disappointments for me. Maybe a Gasly as well has been disappointing. Giovinazzi's been okay. I think Ferrari on the whole have been frustrating more than disappointing, but that's my driver that I'm disappointed with. In terms of the one that's exceeded my expectations, it's Valtteri Bottas by a mile. I didn't expect him to struggle like he did towards the back end of 2018, but I did not expect him to come into 2019 the same way he started last season and then get the look as well. So they're my two picks, but I'll come to you first, Stuart, on that.
Yes, I sort of agree with you on Grosjean. It was... I feel like we're picking on Dan now, but he, as you say, he started he ended the year strongly last year, and we all kind of thought, what would his year look like if that had been consistent from the start? He had, there were a number of different factors that affected the start of last year, and it's a shame that he's sort of having a struggle into this year. What stood out to me every time I sort of thought about it is Giovinazzi, because I haven't really thought about him at all, other than when I've realised that I hadn't thought about him at all. And he's kind of not. I think he's tricky, and he's being a little bit Van Dorned by Kimi Räikkönen, in that Kimi Räikkönen is so good and so experienced that he's kind of not the right benchmark to measure Gio against. So it's really hard to sort of see where he is. But at the moment, I kind of expected a little bit more of him, and I think I predicted him to be the Rookie of the Year. So I need him to kind of step up a little bit if he doesn't mind. Hard to disagree with you on Bottas, but I will say, and I think maybe I'm in a minority on this, but I didn't actually expect Leclerc to be this good this quickly. We re-chatted a bit last year about whether he'd be able to take on Vettel, and some of you were like very positive about it and thought, yeah, he's going to bring it to Vettel. And I was hopeful, but I really didn't think he would in year one. And he races in, and he could be chancing all over in points if it wasn't for one thing or the other. So yeah, Leclerc's kind of stood out quite significantly for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. I mean, I will say in terms of teams that have disappointed, by the way, that's Renault all the way for me. They've disappointed me massively this year. And I don't know, I might be about to step on your toes with this, Dan, but one other driver that I think has done very well this year so far is Max Verstappen. So I think he deserves a mention, but kind of expect that from him in that Red Bull. But what are your two picks? Disappointing driver and or team, and the one that's exceeded your expectations? I love the way it's worded.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I've got to quickly defend Grosjean. I won't take too long. 3 retirements, 2 mechanical, 1 first lap incident. He's got time. The other time he was 11th, so I'll leave that there. I'm fine with Grosjean so far. Anyway, biggest disappointment for me is Ricciardo. I expected him to jump in. I thought he'd be most races hovering about that best of the rest, but China, yes, he was there, but apart from that, I know he's had retirements himself and it's not been a great season for him, but even just the way, I mean, the mistake he made with Kvyat, this is just not Daniel Ricciardo. And like I said, I think it's just that I'm surprised that he just hasn't taken it like a duck to water or fish to water, whatever the saying is.
Fish to water.
It's one of them. I'm just really surprised at Ricciardo, to be honest. But actually, someone who I think needs a mention here, my biggest surprise, is Lando Norris. Yeah. I was very critical of Norris. I thought he needed another season in Formula 2. I thought they'd rushed him through just to get Van Dorn out the way. But I don't think he's comfortably beating Sainz. I'm not saying that, but the fact that he's there, giving him at least a good go. I did not expect that, especially so early on in the season. So that's not British bias. I know people say that quite a bit, but really Norris, I did not expect that from him this season.
Yeah. I would also say I can't think of a team that's like surprised me in a good way, that's sort of exceeding expectations. But the top three are kind of where I kind of expect them to be, but everyone else is sort of floundering more than I thought. We haven't had and I talked about this every single race, but we haven't seen a strong team come out of that midfield. We've sort of seen them all fighting and making mistakes and having a tougher time than we thought. So it'll be interesting to see where we are in a few races' time and which team looks the strongest, because right now it's a bit of a mess.
I think Racing Point could be a good shout for that, because historically, when they were Force India, their season didn't really get going till Spain, but they've actually got some really decent points on the board at this stage. So maybe they could be one that have exceeded. I mean, there's one team, by the way, that has absolutely matched my expectations, and that's Williams. That's kind of what I expected coming out of testing, unfortunately. But I feel bad for picking Grosjean, because Dan makes a great point. It's not all been his fault this year, has it? So I didn't even think, how bad's that? I didn't even think of Daniel Ricciardo. But I think Dan may have won that round.
Well, hey.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Daniel Ricciardo, unfortunately, yeah.
We'll go to some quicker questions then. Got a couple of these to ask. One from Arslan over on Twitter says, who's your favourite driver? What era did you enjoy the most of F1? I think in terms of era, my favourite era was the 90s. That was the one I was growing up with as a kid. I think that was a great era. Obviously, Schumacher fanboy, so I didn't enjoy the 90s as much as I did the early noughties. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, I think the 90s for me, I don't personally have an absolute outright favourite driver on the grid. Contrary to what my comment sections may say. Equally, I don't really dislike a driver on the grid, but I'm developing a soft spot for Alex Albon. He seems like a really nice kid, and he's clearly got some talent. So I think I'll go. If I had to pick a favourite right now, we'll go with Alex Albon. Why not? What about Dan? Who's your favourite driver?
Can I quickly say as well, Sean, that's big improvement from you from the winter streams. You finally called him Alex Albon, not Chris Albon. So well done.
Yeah, I still call him Chris from time to time.
Yeah. My favourite driver is Grosjean. Obviously.
Wow.
And big surprise there. My favourite period, the late 2000s, I really enjoyed. That was a little bit like you, Sean. That was when I was a kid watching F1 and getting into F1. And I really enjoyed the early 2010s as well. So that's cheating a little bit. But that was the kind of the late 2000s and the early 2010s for me. I know it's not that far away, but I've not been watching F1 that long. So it's a little bit more tricky for me to answer. But there were some great years in that period.
Wow, Stuart. Grosjean is Dan's favourite driver.
I'm shocked.
Jeez.
I'm shocked about
Stunned.
Kind of on the whole, Ricciardo's still my favourite driver. I think he's exciting and like a good personality. Like I don't feel any qualms about getting behind him, but he has had this bad year at the moment, and I'm keeping an eye on these young drivers coming through, because actually not only are they quite exciting to watch, but also they seem like pretty good guys. Like I think Leclerc seems like a good guy. Norris is hilarious. Russell's quite quiet. Not really sure about him yet, but I think we're going to have this era we're about to sort of launch into, which I guess is the 20s, of my favorite era. So I started watching in the late 90s. So I started watching when Mick Hakkinen was winning his titles and the build up to Schumacher finally getting that title with Ferrari. But then I immediately went into sort of, again, I wasn't a big Schumacher fan. So I know we went into the sort of 5 years on the row of Ferrari dominance, not as dominant as sort of the Red Bull and Mercedes era. So my favorite era was that, again, the late 20s, the sort of 2005 to 2011, when we had quite a big mixture of different teams winning. It was all quite exciting and it felt refreshing. And yeah, we had lots of different winners, lots of different people on pole, lots of different championship winners. And that was kind of it seems weird now. It seems like just a sort of complete, like, not like F1 at all, because we're kind of all the time been watching F1 in the last 20 odd years. It's been more these periods of dominance than anything else. But yeah, that's what I liked a lot. We went from Alonso to Vettel in sort of 5 drivers.
Yeah, that was 5 drivers in 5 years, wasn't it, with the titles? Because you got Alonso with his second, then it was Kimi, Lewis, Jensen, and Seb. I'm sound like I'm mates with them all, don't I? Rather than their surnames. But yeah, that was a really good period. That's a good shout. We'll go with one more. super quickly from Bredo, apologies if I butcher names, says, who is going to win the Best of the Rest Championship this year? Also, is this going to be on Google Podcasts? Baby steps with the podcast. This is going to be YouTube, SoundCloud, and hopefully, provided it works, Spotify. And then we'll see where we go from there based on feedback. But nothing's off the table. But who's going to win Best of the Rest then, Dan? Who's going to do it this year?
Oh, this is impossible. Carlos Sainz. A little bit left field, but yeah, I think that McLaren's looking strong.
Are you going for McLaren for the team one as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, these first 4 races have been chaos in the midfield, but they're the team for me that just seem to be edging it.
It's really knife edge stuff, isn't it? It's really hard to get to have a strong feeling about who's going to actually have a consistent full year. But I think McLaren could be that Best of the Rest team. But I really think Perez could be this Best of the Rest driver. He's really been strong at the beginning of the year. And like you said, I think that Racing Point has probably got off to a better start than usual. So, yeah, maybe Perez can, one day get himself into a top 3 seat, although I can't imagine how.
I'll be honest, my picks were Perez and Racing Point because of that point I was making earlier about usually get a slow start and have actually got a pretty decent start this year. So fingers crossed I'll do well, but I completely agree with you, Stuart. It's so close, it's almost impossible to call, isn't it? It could be any one of, 6
really
teams? Maybe Toro Rosso's a bit of a stretch, but if they demonstrate the pace they showed they have got in Baku at times, then maybe they can be in there, but it's just impossible to call in there. But I'm going to go with Racing Point, and we are going to leave it there for this week's podcast thing. I still haven't got, I keep calling it the F1 Word podcast. It's really unimaginative, and I'm fully aware of that, but I'm sure we'll come up with something. Thank you very much, Dan. It was lovely to talk to you again, mate. It has been a while, like I say, and a nice little change of pace today.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. It's been a good laugh, and I think it's been nice and chilled. So thank you for having me, man.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. Thank you as well to Stuart. I know I feel like I'm leaning on you a lot at the moment, so apologies for that. But thank you for popping along to this, and thanks again for Sunday as well.
It's always a pleasure to be on here chatting F1 with you. I hope this podcast is well received. It's been nice to chill out and know I can say nonsense that you can edit out.
That's what you think. There's a whole outtakes reel. No, thank you very much to both of you, and I'm sure I'll talk to you both shortly as well. Lovely. Thank you very much, of course, to Stuart and to Dan. Been a pleasure as always, and thanks to you guys for tuning in. As I said, this is available as usual on YouTube. Obviously, you'll know where it's available depending on where you're listening to right now, but on other platforms as well. SoundCloud, they will go up simultaneously with the YouTube stream, and also the Spotify one. I think takes a couple of hours to go on Spotify, so it might be a little bit later, but it will be available on there. Links are all going to be in the description down below. I will be back later in the week with more content as we build up to the Spanish Grand Prix, possibly the last ever Spanish Grand Prix. Scary thought, that, losing tracks left, right and centre, it feels like sometimes. You can follow me over on social media, links to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course the Discord are all in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.